Welcome back to Life Unfiltered. I think we've all been there, right? Putting things off because we're just not feeling totally ready. Like we think if I just knew a little more or if I could just perfect this one last thing, then I'd be ready to go. But today we're going to deep dive into that whole perfectionism thing and how it can really hold us back.
Yeah, it's like we're all just waiting for the perfect moment, right? But the ironic thing is, while you're waiting, you're missing out on so many chances to actually, learn and get better.
It's true. I mean, it's like we think we need this perfect, clear path laid out in front of us before we can take a single step. But honestly, it's those unexpected stumbles and those detours that really teach us the most. I know I've definitely been guilty of this, especially like when I was launching my first website.
And the websites, launching a website. I mean, talk about a recipe for perfectionism, right?
Oh, tell me about it. I was obsessed with every single detail. I remember typing color palettes, font sizes, even the placement of the social media icons. It was like the fate of the entire internet rested on these like tiny details.
And how long did that whole meticulous planning process, how long did that last?
Weeks. Seriously, weeks I spent just tweaking and refining, convinced that if I just got everything perfect, that the website would just like magically launch itself into internet stardom or something.
So what was it that finally kind of snapped you out of that perfectionist spiral?
Well, a friend of mine had just launched her own business, right? And her website. It was simple, it was functional, it was just a platform for, showcasing her work. And guess what? It was doing amazing.
It's funny how sometimes seeing someone else just like go for it, that can give you that push you needed.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think a lot of times perfectionism disguises itself as this, like this pursuit of excellence. But really what it's doing is just causing us to procrastinate. It's stopping us from trying things out, learning from our mistakes and actually, creating something really valuable.
As you're saying that, I'm realizing how often perfectionism is really rooted in fear. Fear of being judged,
Yeah.
fear of failing, fear of not being good enough.
For sure, fear is a big part of it. And I get it. We live in a world where everyone's always pushing for perfection and mistakes. Forget it, they're like the ultimate no-no. But what if we just shifted our perspective a bit? What if we, instead of striving for perfect, which let's face it is totally subjective and impossible to actually achieve, what if we just aimed for better?
Better, I like that. Better feels a lot more approachable, more realistic. It's like, yeah, there's always room to grow and improve, but without all that pressure of having to nail it perfectly the first time.
Exactly. And that shift in perspective, that's what we call a growth mindset. It's basically the belief that our abilities, they're not fixed, they can change, we can develop new skills, we can learn from our mistakes, and we can constantly, keep evolving.
So how do we cultivate this growth mindset? Like, how do
Mhm.
we rewire our brains to embrace challenges and see setbacks as opportunities to learn?
It all starts with becoming more aware of how we talk to ourselves, especially when we make a mistake. Do we beat ourselves up? Or do we try to encourage ourselves and, offer ourselves support?
Yeah, it's so easy to fall into that negative self-talk trap, especially when you're feeling like unsure of yourself.
It is, but we can actually choose a different path. We can be our own cheerleaders. We can focus on what we're doing well and celebrate our wins, even the small ones.
And I bet the more we do that, the more natural it becomes, right? Like it's kind of like building a muscle. The more you exercise that growth mindset, the stronger it gets.
You got it. And as you build that muscle, you become more resilient, more adaptable, and better able to handle those ups and downs that come with, anything you try to do in life.
This is great stuff. I'm already feeling inspired to be a bit more growth oriented myself.
Mm.
But before we move on, I want to hear more about how we can actually apply this growth mindset,
Yeah.
in practical ways.
That's a great question, and it's something we'll definitely dig into deeper as we keep talking. So, we've been talking about this whole idea of shifting from perfect to better and really embracing that growth mindset. But how do we actually make that happen? How do we go from thinking about starting to actually, taking that first step?
That's the real challenge, isn't it? Like it's one thing to get the concept, but it's a whole other thing to actually break free from those old habits of like hesitating and second guessing ourselves. It's like,
Mhm.
you're supposed to exercise, but actually dragging yourself to the gym, that's a different story.
It really is. And just like with exercise, the key is to be consistent. It's not about finding a quick fix. It's about creating a practice, something you do regularly.
So what are some of the, I guess you could say, the exercises that can help us build up those growth mindset muscles?
One of the most effective things I've found is to break down those big, scary goals into smaller, more manageable pieces.
Right, because if you look at the whole thing, it can be pretty overwhelming. It's like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Exactly. When we focus on those smaller, more bite-sized actions, it doesn't feel so intimidating. Instead of getting stuck because the whole project just seems too huge, we can just put all our energy into finishing those smaller tasks one after the other.
So let's say someone's feeling completely overwhelmed by the thought of, I don't know, starting a business. What would be a good first step for them?
Well, instead of trying to write this whole elaborate business plan right off the bat, they could start by researching just one specific part of their idea. They could spend some time, like an hour even, figuring out who their target audience is, or maybe looking into different marketing strategies for their industry. The main thing is to pick a task that feels doable, something that you can actually accomplish and that moves you closer to that bigger goal.
So it's about taking those first steps, even if they seem really tiny compared to the whole project. And I imagine that as you start checking off those smaller steps, you start to feel like you're actually getting somewhere.
Totally. Every time you achieve something, even if it seems small, it gives you more motivation and helps you believe in yourself. It's like that snowball effect. It starts out small, but as it rolls down the hill, it picks up more and more snow and it gets bigger and more powerful as it goes.
That's a great visual, and it really highlights how important it is to be consistent, right?
Absolutely. Even if you can only dedicate a little bit of time each day or each week, those small, consistent efforts will add up over time. It's like compound interest. Those small, regular investments can lead to some pretty impressive returns in the end.
So we've got breaking things down into smaller steps and being consistent. What else can we do to help us overcome that initial hurdle of just getting started?
Another really helpful technique is setting deadlines. I know some people get stressed out just hearing the word deadline, but when you use them the right way, they can actually be super motivating. They give you a sense of regency and help you figure out which tasks to prioritize.
I can see how deadlines could be helpful, but I also know how easy it is to feel overwhelmed by them. How do we use deadlines effectively without, freaking ourselves out?
The trick is to set realistic deadlines, ones that fit your schedule and how much time you actually have. So instead of setting this one giant deadline for the entire project, try breaking it down into smaller phases and give each phase its own deadline. That way, you have these smaller milestones to aim for, which feels a lot less scary than trying to tackle the whole thing all at once.
That makes sense. It's like creating a roadmap with clear checkpoints along the way.
Exactly. And once you set those deadlines, write them down. That way, you can actually see them and keep track of your progress. It's like having a visual reminder of where you're headed and what you need to do. You can use a planner, a whiteboard, a spreadsheet, whatever works for you. The main thing is to make those deadlines visible and keep them top of mind.
So we've got breaking things down, setting deadlines, and tracking our progress. Any other strategies we should keep in mind?
One more that I always find super helpful is celebrating those wins along the way. It's easy to get so caught up in all the things we still have to do that we forget to acknowledge what we've actually accomplished. But celebrating those wins, even the little ones, is so important for keeping yourself motivated and making those good habits stick.
I love this one. It's so true how we tend to focus on what we haven't done instead of giving ourselves credit for all the things we have done. What are some good ways to celebrate those wins without, going over the top?
It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Just taking a break to enjoy a cup of coffee or tea, putting on your favorite song, or even just telling a friend or family member about something you achieved. The point is to do something that feels good and helps you really savor those moments of success.
Those are great ideas. It's all about finding those little bits of joy and satisfaction,
Hmm.
just reminding yourself why you're doing this in the first place.
Exactly. And those celebrations kind of act like a reward, right? They encourage us to keep going and to reach for even bigger goals.
So, to recap, we've got this whole toolkit for beating that feeling of being stuck and actually getting things done. We can break down big goals into smaller steps, set realistic deadlines, keep track of our progress, and celebrate those wins along the way. What else can we do to really embrace that growth mindset and, be okay with things not being perfect?
One of the biggest things we can do is change how we think about failure. Instead of seeing it as this huge setback, what if we started to see it as feedback?
I love that idea. But I have to admit, it's definitely easier said than done. How do we actually reframe failure in a way that makes us feel empowered instead of defeated?
Well, it starts with understanding that failure is just a normal part of learning. Think about a time when you were learning something new, like riding a bike or playing an instrument or learning a new language. Did you get it perfect on the first try?
Oh, absolutely not. I remember when I was learning to play the piano, I think I hit every wrong note possible before I could play even a simple song. And don't even get me started on my attempts at parallel parking.
Exactly. We all go through those awkward stages when we're trying to learn something new, and those failures are actually what help us get better. They teach us what works and what doesn't, and they help us fine-tune our approach.
So it's not about trying to avoid failure altogether. It's more about accepting it as part of the process.
Right. And when we start to see failure that way, it becomes less about whether we're good enough and more about experimenting and trying new things. It's about putting ourselves out there, seeing what happens, and making adjustments along the way.
I'm starting to get it. It's like taking the pressure off of having to get everything right from the start and letting ourselves be a little more playful, more curious, and I guess ultimately more successful in the long run.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that failing at something doesn't mean we're a failure. It just means we're still learning.
I love that. It's about not letting our performance define our worth.
Right. And that's where self-compassion comes in. When we can be kind to ourselves, even when we mess up, we create a safe space to learn and grow.
That's such a good point. It's about treating ourselves the way we would treat a friend who's going through the same thing, with kindness and understanding.
Absolutely. And that self-compassion can be a really powerful way to fight back against that perfectionism that's holding us back.
So far, we've talked about breaking down goals, setting deadlines, keeping track of our progress, celebrating wins, reframing failure as feedback, and showing ourselves some compassion. Are there any other practical tips for developing a growth mindset and getting past that fear of not being perfect?
You know what else can be incredibly helpful? Surrounding yourself with supportive people.
That's a great point. We talked about being our own cheerleaders, but having a whole team of cheerleaders in our corner can make a huge difference.
It really can. When we have people around us who believe in us, who encourage us to grow, and who celebrate our successes with us, it creates this safe and supportive space where we feel more comfortable taking risks and learning from our mistakes.
So how do we find those supportive people? Where do we even start?
It could be a group of friends, family, colleagues, even online communities. The main thing is to find people who share your values, who inspire you, and who push you to be your best self.
Like that. It's about finding those people who lift you up and help you see all the good in yourself.
Exactly. And those connections can be so valuable, especially when you're facing those inevitable ups and downs that come with personal growth and trying to figure out who you are.
As we wrap up this part of our conversation,
Hmm.
I want to encourage everyone listening to think about their own support systems. Who are those people in your life who believe in you, who encourage you, and who are there to celebrate your wins? And if you feel like you need more support, don't be afraid to reach out and build those connections.
That's so important. We're not meant to do this alone. We all need those people who can help us stay motivated, inspired, and on track. And remember, even the longest journey starts with a single step.
And those first steps don't have to be perfect. They just have to happen. So what are you waiting for?
Welcome back to Life Unfiltered. We've been talking about perfectionism, how it can trip us up and how to shift gears and embrace a more, I guess you could say, a more growth-oriented mindset. And we've gone through some really practical tips, things you can actually do to put those ideas into practice, like breaking those big goals down into smaller steps, setting realistic deadlines, and, remembering to celebrate those wins along the way.
It's been a great conversation. But I got to say, there's this one thing that keeps kind of popping into my head. What about those moments when the fear and self-doubt just like take over? Those times when you're about to go for something and then that little voice in your head starts saying, wait, what if you mess up? What if you're
Right.
just not good enough?
Yes. The inner critic. We all have one, and it can really put a damper on things when you're trying to, chase your dreams. But the good news is you don't have to let that voice call all the shots.
So how do we deal with it, that inner critic? How do we quiet down those voices of self-doubt?
First things first, just acknowledge those thoughts and feelings. Don't try to push them away or pretend they're not there. Just kind of notice them with a little curiosity and maybe even some compassion.
So it's like, hey, inner critic, I hear you. Thanks for sharing, but I'm not going to let you dictate my life.
Exactly. It's like you see a storm cloud up in the sky. You notice it, but
Right.
you don't have to let it rain on your parade, right?
That's a great analogy. So once we've acknowledged those negative thoughts, what's next?
Well, then it's time to challenge those thoughts. Like, really ask yourself, is this thought actually true? Is there any proof to back it up? A lot of times, those negative thoughts are just based on fear and assumptions, not actual facts.
It's like putting those thoughts on trial and making them show you the evidence.
Right. And often, when you start to examine them a little closer, they just fall apart.
Okay, so we acknowledge, we challenge.
Mm.
What's the next step?
The next step is to replace those negative thoughts with more positive ones, thoughts that are more encouraging and empowering.
So how do we do that? Like, how do we actually switch from that negative self-talk to a more positive inner dialogue?
It's about rewriting the script, basically. Creating a new story that's based on self-compassion, encouragement, and believing in your own abilities. So instead of saying, I'm not good enough, try saying, I'm learning and growing every day. Or instead of asking, what if I fail? Ask, what if I succeed?
Those are great examples. It's amazing how much our words can affect us, both the ones we say out loud and the ones we just say to ourselves.
It really is. It's all about training your brain to focus on what's possible instead of dwelling on those doubts.
Okay, so we challenge the negative thoughts, we replace them with positive ones.
Yeah.
What else can we do to quiet that inner critic down?
Focusing on past successes can be really powerful. It's easy to get so caught up in the current challenges that we forget about all the amazing things we've already accomplished.
That's true. It's like we need to make a highlight reel of all our wins and keep replaying it whenever those doubts start to creep back in.
Exactly. Take a few minutes and really think about those times when you overcame obstacles, reached goals, or even just surprised yourself with how strong and resilient you were. Remember how good that felt? And let it boost your confidence.
It's like building a reserve of self-belief that you can draw on whenever you need a little extra support.
You got it. And the more you focus on those past successes, the stronger that belief in yourself will become.
All right, so we've got acknowledging those negative thoughts, challenging them, replacing them, and remembering our wins. What else can we add to our toolkit for dealing with the inner critic?
One more tool that I find incredibly powerful is visualization.
Visualization. Now that's interesting. Tell me more.
It's a technique used by athletes, performers, you name it. It's all about creating a clear mental picture of yourself, achieving your goal, experiencing that success, and really feeling all the emotions that come with it.
So it's like making a mental movie of your future triumphs.
Exactly. And the more details you can add to that movie, the more powerful it becomes. Really use all your senses. What do you see, hear, feel, smell, taste when you achieve that goal?
I can see how that would be incredibly motivating, like giving your brain a preview of all the amazing things that are possible.
That's the idea. By repeatedly visualizing yourself succeeding, you're essentially training your mind to believe it's possible, which can make a huge difference in actually making those visions a reality.
This has been such an amazing conversation. We've covered so many practical, powerful ways to get past perfectionism, embrace that growth mindset, and start taking action toward our goals, even when that inner critic tries to hold us back.
The bottom line is you're capable of incredible things. Don't let fear, self-doubt, or the need for everything to be perfect keep you from going after your dreams.
You've given us so much to think about today. I'm feeling inspired, and I'm ready to tackle some of those things I've been putting off. And to everyone listening, remember, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to start.
And once you start, keep going. Embrace the whole journey, celebrate those wins, learn from the stumbles, and never stop believing in your own incredible potential.
That's the perfect way to wrap things up. Thanks for joining us today for this deep dive into the power of just starting, even if it's not perfect.
It was my pleasure. And remember, the world needs your unique talents and what you have to offer. So go out there, make those dreams happen, and don't let perfectionism get in your way.